Hey everybody, it's Chad. We'll get to the show in just a second, but before we do, I wanted to tell you about a new app we rolled out called Certera.ai. That's CERTERA.ai. What it is an app that lets legal professionals run legal-related prompts through multiple AI models, and then they get to pick which response they think is better. The app keeps the leaderboard ranking the models in real time. It just involves 3 steps. You enter a legal-related prompt, you review 2 responses from different AI models, you vote for the one you like better. If you're in anonymous mode, the app will randomly serve up responses from 2 LLM models, but they're not revealed until you vote. You can also select the 2 models you want to pit head to head and choose the answer you like better there too. There's also an anonymization feature that cleans up identifiers in the prompt. So, if you're a legal professional and you like comparing outputs from different AI models to see which one is better, I hope you check out Certera.ai. That's CERTERA.ai. There's no cost to use it. You just need to be a legal professional. This is Technically Legal, a podcast about legal technology, innovation in the legal industry, and the impact tech is having on the law. I'm Chad Ming, the founder of legal services company Percipient, and on today's show, I'm talking to scientist, professor, and author Vivienne Ming about her book, Robot Proof: When Machines Have All the Answers, Build Better People. A few weeks ago, I was reading an essay about a study performed by Vivienne Ming, who's a theoretical neuroscientist. Admittedly, at the time, I had no idea what a theoretical neuroscientist was or what she even did. But what I did understand and was intrigued by was her study. What she did was, she went to the prediction market Polymarket and came up with a list of future events. She then got a group of people together and asked them to predict the outcomes for these events she had collected from Polymarket. Before making the predictions, she divided the people into 3 groups. A group that could not use AI, a group that could use AI, and then she used AI alone to make some of these predictions. And here's where it gets interesting. What she figured out is that humans alone, without the help of AI, were the worst. AI alone was just only a little better, and a good chunk of the people that could use AI basically adopted the AI outcome verbatim, and they didn't do much better than AI alone. However, there was a subset of the human AI group that she called validators. And they're the ones that did the best. What she figured out was that these validators augmented their use of the AI and went back and forth with it as sparring partners to come up with the best answers. And those answers were the most accurate making these predictions. In the article, I also figured out Vivienne was releasing a book called Robot Proof: When Machines Have All the Answers, Build Better People. So I had to get a copy. And not surprisingly, it's even more intriguing than the study. After I got the book, I asked her to come on the show, and she graciously accepted, and here we are today. If I were to sum up Vivienne's take on AI, as she explains in her book, it's that for humans to win in the AI age, they need to become cyborgs. And what does that mean? It means they need to focus on using AI to augment their skills rather than just automate tasks for them. In my conversation with Vivienne today, we're going to get into what it takes to become one of those cyborgs. We talk about why the future of work isn't about competing with machines on menial tasks, but rather, as she explains it, we need to double down on deeply human traits like curiosity, resilience, and what she calls endogenous motivation. As legal professionals, we're always trying to figure out how AI fits into our day-to-day practices. As we're going to hear today, Vivienne argues that the real magic happens when we embrace the unknown, because as she puts it, AI knows everything but understands nothing. And what she believes is understanding is up to us as humans. How does one become a professional mad scientist?
Well, you be unqualified for any other job. That's kind of like the old joke that an entrepreneur is someone who is otherwise unemployable. I've gotten a lot of very fancy job offers in my life, like chief scientist of some famous and brand name companies, but I just love what I already do, which is essentially people bring me any kind of problem regarding human beings, from a dying child to a struggling company to a global education or AI policy. And if my team and we feel we have something unique to offer, I pay for everything. Whatever we invent, we give away. So as I often say, if we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be science. And if anyone else was doing it, it wouldn't be mad.
Really, truly, you are a theoretical neuroscience scientist, right? And explain to those, the uninitiated, including myself, until I saw that Wall Street Journal article, explain what that is.
So this is a field in which largely physicists and engineers pretend to be neuroscientists. But if you're wondering, really think along the lines of theoretical physics if you could start from first principles, mathematical principles. And in my case, as an academic, starting from information theory, bits of information. Claude Shannon, if you're an aficionado of the history of science, can we start there from purely theoretical models and arrive at how the brain works? Well, it turns out when I entered this field starting roughly in 1999, the way people were approaching that was what's called machine learning, a subdiscipline of artificial intelligence. And so people like me and some notable people in my orbit, like my grand advisor, John Hopfield, who won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago for his original work in artificial intelligence, and his co-laureate, Jeff Hinton, who was part of this field as well, were building these large AI models trained on data from the natural world, pictures and sounds and words, to understand how the brain works. None of us really thought, oh, and the result of that will be everybody 20 years from now is going to be using AI to solve every problem. It was purely scientific insight. We were also studying brains to understand how AI could work better, but I don't know that anyone thought it would become what it is today.
As noted, you've been doing the AI thing for a long time before it was what we know today. You start San Diego, you go to school in San Diego, Carnegie Mellon. What's the journey to get into AI? What was your interest in it? What spurred you to do it?
So the journey for me, much like the rest of my career, involves literal coin tosses and dumb luck. So even when I was picking a major as an undergrad, I flipped a coin between economics and cognitive neuroscience. It genuinely came up heads. That is literally why I started studying brains. Even then, I thought I would do what is traditionally done, which is you stick wires into your whatever animal you like least in the world and try and understand how its brain works. If you're studying the auditory system, that might be the Mongolian gerbil for reasons of bizarre curiosity. It has a hearing system very similar to ours. But almost immediately, a professor of mine recommended me to work in a lab called the Machine Perception Lab. This was part of a constellation of scientific labs under a very famous guy named Terry Sinosky, the student of the pre-mentioned John Hopfield. And I just got hooked. My undergraduate honors thesis, instead of being about neurons per se, was a neural network that I wrote the code for, I worked out the math for. It analyzed people's faces, and it could tell the difference between a real and a fake smile. So that was my introduction to artificial intelligence. And it's also my introduction to what I found interesting, which wasn't per se the application of it in pure computer science terms. What I found interesting and what I took forward into graduate school was the ability to understand people, human beings. So then I studied how we understand speech. And then I started my first company doing educational technology. And everything I've done since is really built off that idea that the power of machine learning, or AI, if you will, for me to understand people.
Right. And so came across my radar in a Wall Street Journal article about a study you did. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, I thought it was really interesting, was you took a group, I think they were in the Bay Area, of humans. Some worked on their own, some worked with AI, and then with AI alone. And you looked at Polymarket and you had them make predictions about certain events in the world. What happened was you found that humans alone didn't do that well. AI did appreciably better. Humans and AI, there was kind of two parts, right? I suspect the part that did well was a minority, but there were humans that basically just took the AI outputs as gospel and they just adopted that. And in the end, those people they basically did as well as the AI alone. But there was a group of people that pushed back, used the AI to challenge their assumptions and challenge the AI's assumptions, and they did really well. They won the contest with these predictions. Am I saying that right?
You got all the details, as is often the case. You put up a bunch of flyers, in this case around UC Berkeley and Greater Berkeley. And it turns out, yeah, even very smart Berkeley students, but otherwise normal people, they don't know what the price of oil will be in 6 months. They don't know if there's going to be a war in Uganda. It's worth noting most of the Polymarket bets are will Elon Musk tweet 30 times in the next week? Or which Kardashian will get married next? Which is horrifying. The amount of money bet on these questions is a condemnation of humanity and prediction markets. But in there are these genuinely meaningful questions of economics and international relations. And, the average UC Berkeley student doesn't know what a barrel of oil costs today, much less what it'll cost in 6 months. So they didn't do very well. The worst AI we looked at, which is a little open source model, did vastly better than the best human being. And the real interesting question is, how do they do together? And the reason I use predictions is, how do you know the AI hasn't just memorized the answer? Well, it can't memorize the future. So we really focused on this forecasting, as it's called. And if the whole question was just who is more accurate on their own, well, the question is answered and it's overwhelmingly AI, although the AI didn't do as well as the prediction market itself. So humans betting, experts betting money were still much better than the AIs, but the naive humans on their own with no prior knowledge were terrible. You put them together, the vast majority of people simply say, GPT, what will be the price of oil in 6 months? It gives them an answer, they copy, they paste, and they're done. And so essentially they're a very slow copy paste function that requires health insurance, which not a good model for the future. And it probably reflects a lot of how AI is being sold in the marketplace, which is, wouldn't it be great to get all of those lazy workers that aren't doing a good job? But what really excites me is that minority, which was not many, about maybe 10% of the Berkeley students, 5% of the general population that I was looking at, almost certainly low single-digit percentages, probably in the general population. They just treated it totally differently. Instead of using the AI to give the answer or using the AI to just reflect, their own beliefs back at them, it's actually even a little more nuanced than came out in the Wall Street Journal article, because they challenged the AI. They used the AI to challenge them. They co-created. And I think importantly different than the way AI is being sold, they would go deep and messy into the data with the AI. Show me the results. Let's think about it together. So a lot of how AI is sold is it will do the boring work, you do the fun stuff. When we looked at this group, which we called cyborgs, everything they did through and through was AI enabled, and they were part of it the whole way through. And one of the things we saw is people that used the AI to do the analysis and then made the decision, sometimes called the centaur model or the human in the loop, it meant they actually didn't understand the problem because they don't know what the AI did. They didn't see the raw data. They did worse than the AI alone, not better. So only the cyborgs, where the human and machine were co-creating their forecasts, did we see what it turns out, not only super AI performance, they did nearly as well as Polymarket, which given naive people 1 hour, 10 predictions, and they were doing as well as experts betting millions of dollars.
It's so interesting. And that group, that minority of the group, is ultimately what you say in your book, Robot Proof. They exhibited the skills and they approached AI the way you say that people need to do to robot proof themselves. And so, but I want to start with the premise, or one of there's several premises in your book, but one of the main ones is that a lot of how we view the way AI is being built today is to replace humans to do these menial tasks, to just have robots do it versus humans, period. But you're saying we need to approach it differently because that's not good for anybody, including the AI. It neglects the human side of the equation. Humans always need to be present in this. Explain that in more detail, like what it means, like that they're neglecting the human element and how not to.
There's a couple of different positions you could take on this, and none of them are irrational in a purely speculative sense. One is, what is AI really making better? Let's just not use it. We'll keep humans in the loop. I think part of what I show in my book, through some just memoir kind of chapters, is there are truly amazing things that AI-enabled people can do that we are unrealistic to achieve on my own. Getting to build a model to help reunite orphan refugees with their families. I got to build the first AI for diabetes for my own son. There's real good to be done here. The other is what you're describing. An army of robotic minions, they carry out your every whim. Wouldn't it be great if people didn't have to do the boring stuff anymore, the menial stuff? Or I think kind of on the down low, what many industrial leaders are thinking is, wouldn't it be great if humans didn't do any of this anymore? Like there's an elite few to remain and we could get rid of everyone else. And we'll pay some lip service to a universal basic income, but in reality, none of these guys are going to pay for that. And it's not a good idea anyways. So I want to be rational. There are definitely jobs I would love to see automated out of the economy. But again, in my research, and not only in my research, and in research released by Anthropic, a large-scale analysis of more than 1 million programmers out in the world that was released in Science, a great study looking at doctors, the absolute best performance was when humans with real high levels of talent and experience interacted deeply with AI. In that medical diagnostics paper, they called it complementary errors. AI and humans made different kinds of mistakes. They complemented each other, and they ended up better off. So I think the rational approach is to think, what truly doesn't need to be done by a human being? Filling out forms, pasting data back and forth. There's a lot of opportunities for automation, but then you fall into this trap of, well, we just need to string together automation after automation, and then a human just approves or disapproves the final result or polish. And again, we found a study of BCG consultants, found a study of people doing colonoscopies, again and again, that performs worse than either if you just did the AI alone, or in some cases, even just the human alone can do this stuff better. So really thinking about that deeper integration, that's what I'm certainly advocating for in the domains that really matter the most. In the book, I talk about a different way of thinking about problems rather than high skill and low skill, because AI doesn't care anything about that. If there's enough data, it doesn't care if this is a job that an elite, neurosurgeon used to do or a petroleum engineer. If there's enough data, it will do what I'm going to call the well-posed parts of the job just as well as the best human beings. Well-posed meaning we understand the problem, we know how to arrive at an answer. There's just a factual answer, there's an algorithm, there's an equation to get there. We now live in a world where for most well-posed problems, modern AI, agentic AI, is simply better than the average person doing that job, competitive with the best professionals doing that job. But where it begins to fall down and where humans really excel, and we saw this in our experiment, is the ill-posed part. Forget the right answers. We don't even know what the question is. And in that, humans have a relative advantage.
I like this quote from your book. I think it hits on what you're saying. AI knows everything, understands nothing.
Which, as I point out, to not sound like an AI doomer or skeptic, because again, I've been doing this for 30 years. I wouldn't have wasted my time building all these models if I didn't believe. I say the same thing about my graduate students. They are brilliant. They're amazing. They know more about the problem that they're researching than I do. Why am I there? Because they're 24, and this is the first time they've ever been asked to explore the unknown. Their whole career up to this moment has been to produce correct answers to known problems. I'm there because my brilliant graduate students know everything and understand nothing. I'm not teaching them knowing, I'm teaching them understanding. And that's the same experience I have working with an LLM.
It makes complete sense. And going back to the point where automating some lower level jobs, you have an interesting take on the argument that, hey, every advancement, every revolution we've had out there, technological revolution we've had, it creates jobs. Like, yeah, some jobs went away, but new jobs came up and everybody's okay.
What's known as the Jevons paradox, yeah.
Exactly. But you go a little deeper and you say, well, that is true. New jobs are created, but in that moment, there's a lot of people with certain skills that they don't come back. Those jobs are gone and they don't come back. And in fact, I love this too. You talked about I think it was a New Yorker cartoon, but a magazine cartoon where they got two horses. looking over at a Model T and they say, no problem, man. Don't worry about it. With the wheel and the plow, we just got more jobs. I love that. I thought it was very apropos to your point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great one, and I also mentioned this apparently little known missive home from a British diplomat working in India, where he writes, "The plains of India are bleached white with the bones of Indian weavers." So yes, the invention of like the jacquard loom led to the fashion industry and the global textile industry. But it took 200 years to get there, in which what turned out to be the second largest industry in the world, which was home fabric making, just disappeared around the world almost overnight. If you didn't live in the British Midlands, then you didn't directly benefit for a very long time. And even then, most of the trained craftsmen in the field were displaced by, believe it or not, Andrew Carnegie. His first job as a little kid in Pittsburgh was putting the bobbins on the looms, because it turns out little kids' fingers could fit better into the mechanism. So we fired all the professionals and we hired a bunch of little kids. I'm not saying that isn't a cycle that heads towards something better. What I'm saying is, one, we are being willfully naive of the massive disruption that happens in the interim. For example, we now live in a world where true depressions are vanishingly unlikely because we changed our economic system after the Great Depression to try and make certain that never happens again. We still have market crashes, but we haven't had that level of economic collapse since that moment. We should be more thoughtful about these moments of massive innovation change. But another thing to note is, if you really think about it, Jevons is a statement about demand and not about supply. So the question for me with AI-driven labor changes is, given where AI is today and its capability, again, of solving well-posed problems on its own, which is genuinely astonishing, as soon as it creates a new job, won't it be qualified to fill that job itself? So the demand side is, to me, not whether there will be more jobs or less. I absolutely believe there will be more. What humans will be qualified to fill those jobs? And if it's defined by what I talked about in my experiment, that those qualities that we saw, which was things like curiosity and intellectual humility and perspective taking, deeply foundational human skills. It wasn't predicted by your ability to factorize a polynomial, although you still need to know how to do such a thing. If it isn't predicted by that, are we building a labor force that will be qualified to fill these new roles? And my prediction, born out of enormous amounts of data, is no, we won't. And it's not going to just magically happen simply because demand exists.
We're getting to the robot proof part right here. So what you're saying, and you hit on it there, curiosity. I kept coming back to, as I read your book, curiosity. That's like the base element of human needs. But you say to robot proof yourself, your kids, and at a higher level, at a macro level, your community, you start with a few things, but I want you to explain this one. Endogenous motivation. Explain how that is like the first precept.
That's one of my nerdisms there, using an endogenous the way, say, a biologist would, like an endogenous infection. People think a lot about incentives. Are we paying salespeople enough to get them to really sell hard? I gave a TED talk about this, actually. What I found in analyzing 100,000 salespeople when I was the chief scientist of one of the first companies doing AI and hiring, believe it or not, way back in 2014, people were doing applied AI in the world more than 10 years ago. What we found was this paradox, seemingly, which is the best salespeople seem to care the least about the incentives. They got the most bonuses because they're the best salespeople. But that turns out to be a correlation rather than a cause. We did a big fancy analysis of sales cycles and could see, I'll put it this way, the people who are most likely to make a sale the day after the end of the sales cycle, when the incentives are the least are your best salespeople. And then we replicated that with software developers. Who's pushing code to a repository when the product's already locked for release? And in fact, people get upset with you for pushing code and changing the product. It turns out your best coders do that. So we saw again and again who at West Point is most likely to end up becoming I guess in this case, a general, or, in others, an admiral. It turns out it's people that have endogenous motivation rather than they're doing it for someone else or for something else. They tend to wash out. And seeing that again and again across these different domains prevents kind of a different story about. It's certainly a different story than a lot of traditional liberal economics might lead you to believe, which is you should just be rationally self-interested, follow the incentives. 100%, there are huge influences there. But we're missing some of this interiority of humanity that, yes, the best people do tend to earn the most, but it turns out that's rarely why they are the best. And so evoking that, I sometimes call it, do you believe your hard work will pay off? Like, that's my lay way of putting it. But I mean it as a neuroscientist. Not, do you say on a questionnaire, I believe my hard work will pay off? If I'm measuring activity in your parietal lobe back here, am I seeing activity where, like, a little internal economist is running the math and saying, yes, don't take the quick, lazy payoff. Wait, invest effort. You'll get a bigger chunk of cheese at the end of that maze than the little cheese that's in front of you. And that difference between people turns out to be really large. Many people, we call it, in economics, for example, you call it a discount function. How much do you discount forward reward? People that wait end up having better lives. They live longer, they have more friends, and obviously they earn more money. But what's interesting is, despite the fact that they earn more money, that doesn't appear to be the actual driver of those outcomes.
Across all those domains, what were the key attributes of these people that you found that have this endogenous motivation?
Well, I mentioned a couple of them that popped in my experiment. Back when I was the chief scientist of this company, I had a data set of 122 million people. And the job of my team was to figure out how good you are at jobs you've never held. And so we looked for the things that were the predictors. This endogenous motivation was one of them, one of the few that I really de novo discovered. But most of them matched, believe it or not, you can go read research. What makes a great employee? People, shock of all shocks, have been studying this for 100 years. So it wasn't like, hey, AI to the rescue, it will figure it all out for us. All we did was take this massive data set and used AI to say, hey, this paper, actually a massive research literature in this case, says that resilience is predictive of career outcomes. If we looked at all 11 million working software developers in the world, and we look at all the code that they write and what they say about themselves on LinkedIn and how they answer questions on a website called Stack Overflow, which is kind of dying out now in the age of AI, can we, one, measure their resilience? And two, does it predict the quality of code that they write and the progression of their careers? And it turns out very much it does. So we find things like resilience and perspective taking, your ability to understand the motivations of other people, curiosity, I noted it earlier, a growth mindset, and some lower level cognitive things like numeracy and literacy and working memory span, how much stuff you can keep in mind. What's interesting about most of the things I just mentioned is I can't give you a lecture on them. You're not going to learn them from the books you read at university. And I doubt any of us has ever taken a course on curiosity or on resilience. But what's very interesting is I put them in my book because they are measurable. Sometimes people call these soft skills. Hard to measure skills, no doubt. But there are standards for measuring these in psychology. I prefer to use behavior. And AI turns out to be a great tool for measuring humans' behaviors and turning it into these assessments. They are predictive of positive life outcomes as well as career outcomes. At the time that I was doing it, now in my new research, they are predictive of success in using AI. And then the last and most important one to me as a kind of humanist scientist is they are changeable. Now, some of the low-level cognitive ones, you're not really going to change much later in life. It's more of a something, if you're a parent, have deep, rich conversations with your kids, give them enriched environments, a lot of stuff like this. By the time you are an adult, your cognitive trajectory for life is largely set. There's maintenance game. But these others, I think people will be surprised. Great research running experiments, like controlled experiments on resilience, showed that entrepreneurs getting a resilience intervention were much more likely to still be in business 5 years later than entrepreneurs, for example, that got like a crash course MBA or finance training.
Let's talk about that. You say they're changeable, that you say this, although hard to measure, you can. So obviously that means at some level they're teachable. So, in your book, you talk a lot about the way the education system is set up. You teach for tests, like rote memorization of information. But what you're talking about there is teaching these skills that don't show up on that kind of test. Like, how do you do it? You say it is teachable, you say it is testable. But what do you recommend?
So there's a couple of different things. If you're leading an organization, the sort of cheapest and easiest way is role modeling. I think people really undervalue peer role modeling. We can see it in kids' life outcomes because you can see, hey, this low socioeconomic status family, by some quirk, happens to live in the catchment for a wealthy neighborhood. And they go to that school, and against the predictions of genetics, their kids end up with substantially better lives. So there's clear peer role modeling effects going on there. Some great work by the noted economist Raj Chetty on similar effects. But actually, take curiosity. I didn't include it in the book because the paper only came out a few weeks ago. But in my newsletter, I talked about a recent experiment done with 8 to 10-year-olds in which controlled experiment, teachers were trained to praise interesting questions instead of right answers. And within just 6 weeks, these kids are asking more questions in class. They score higher on standardized measures of curiosity. And when new curricular material was brought in this case, science material, they engage more deeply without any additional prompting. So praising questions versus praising right answers. And what I will provocatively say to anyone running a company is, which of those are you engaged in? I'm willing to bet most of the praise comes to the genius that has the right answer. So pretty soon, everyone here follows the incentives. But what's interesting is the evidence suggests not only are people responding to incentives, you're literally changing the way the reward circuits in their brains functions, and you're sort of stretching out that tau, that reward discounting function. And why are people interested in asking questions which may reveal that they're wrong or probably aren't the right answer? Because we see this in students. In a paper my wife and I published, most students were hiding their own misconceptions from themselves by hiding behind right answers right out of the book. And when students began exploring, it actually, and they asked questions and they were wrong, this may surprise you, but being, let's call it productively wrong, became one of the best predictors that these, in this case of this paper, university students would go on to graduate faster and secure better jobs after graduation than their other A-level students. Being wrong in public, which is intellectual humility and curiosity all rolled into one.
That reminds me of something else in the book. You talk about, too, that there's a piece of software, I think you were involved in it, for teachers. It was helping them kind of ferret out some of these attributes in the students that you're talking about there. This reminded me of legal because you said the teachers didn't really want to adopt it. It was kind of just changed the way they were doing stuff, which is interesting to me, not interesting to me, because you'd think teachers, like they're the cutting edge of free thinking and stuff. You'd think they would be up for this, but just like lawyers are sometimes reticent to adopt new technology, teachers seem to be in the same boat.
Everyone across the board. Here's maybe where we really will come back to the nature of just traditional extrinsic or exogenous incentives is I've got a 60-hour-a-week job. I'm really only being paid for 40 of them. Sounds like you want me to have to learn an entirely new job. And honestly, the way AI is transforming work, I think even in the ideal of the way it's transforming work, yeah, I want you to do a whole new kind of job. Something a lot more like what I do every day. Here's a problem no one's ever solved before. Go at it. But why? If you're a teacher, if I sold the exact same technology, but I pitched it as it cuts your grading time in half versus it doubles the number of students that will go to university, of course the teachers want their students to be successful. But in their day-to-day life, that's not the problem that's in front of them. It's that they never have enough time to get anything done. They're scrambling to just get all this grading done. Wouldn't it be great if there was a tool that could help me get the grading done, or for that matter, could just do it all by itself? So when you build technologies, the reality isn't, I can imagine a world in which this technology fixes everything, which is an easy description of large language models, agentic AI. But unfortunately, as I show in my research, that is simply not how the majority of people engage with these technologies. They engage really shallowly in ways that make their lives easier rather than ways that essentially expand their capabilities. So people select into automation instead of augmentation. And that's deeply problematic.
So let's go there. Bring it back to the micro level. What, at the individual level, the listeners, what should they be doing to become cyborgs, to robot-proof themselves, like instead of just using AI superficially and protecting their professional lives because they have qualities that new modern employers need?
So I talk about a couple of things in the book. I'll mention one of those. I'll talk about something that didn't make it into the book because I only started doing it first with my own kids and then myself afterwards. But the general rule here is go deep. This is a classic psychological tension, deep versus shallow processing. It kind of reflects on Danny Kahneman's famous book, Thinking Fast and Slow. We can't think slow all the time. Slow or deep is effortful. It's literally effortful. It uses a lot more energy. It's exhausting to do it. But if you're never spending time deep, look at everyone on their phone on any given subway anywhere in the world, and it's just swipe, swipe, swipe. That is deeply problematic. Hey, it's deeply problematic if you study dementia. Like, that's worrying that people are not thinking. What it means is every now and then, go a little deeper. So here's one of something most people probably don't think of as AI. You're using Google Maps or Waze or Apple Maps to get to work. Here's a fun little game to play. Whatever it suggests, you can't use that recommendation. Think about what you know of the city you live in and try and beat it there taking a different route. I know that sounds like a little game, but you'll get at what I'm talking about. Go a little deep. Think about how to get to work. Hell, even if you don't use an automated navigation system, which, by the way, one is AI and two is already showing, because it's been around a lot more than agentic AI, already showing evidence of cognitive decline from cognitive substitution. We're using it to navigate instead of us. The lowest rates of Alzheimer's are taxi drivers and ambulance drivers, not bus drivers, because they drive a standard route. I guarantee you Uber drivers will not show that same benefit because they never think about it. They just follow the line. So don't follow the line. Not as a rule. AI, if you've got Mythos open now and you're using its recommendation, it's probably right. Take that seriously. But I'm saying don't just take it like an oracle, that it is right. My students are brilliant. I never take what they say as right because they don't understand the problem they're working on. I follow my spidey sense and I get a sense they might be answering the wrong question, the question they thought rather than the one I was after. Use that same spidey sense. So here's a couple of other concrete rather than just, whatever it suggests, try something different. Do that. But here's two others. I use something to actually write the book that I describe in the book, which is the Nemesis prompt. I was using Gemini a lot at the time. Gemini 3 had just coming out. And I use a lot of Gemini because it's cost efficient. It's not the best writer, Claude is. But if you're using it a lot, Google stuff by design is very efficient. What I would never allow it to do is write anything. So what I would do instead is stream of consciousness, write everything I wanted to say, and then I would give it the Nemesis prompt. Gemini, you are my lifelong enemy. You are my nemesis. You have dogged me my entire career, pointing out to the public every mistake I've ever made. Here is the new chapter of my upcoming book. Read through it in detail and explain to me why I'm wrong and what I can do about it. And again, I don't simply take its feedback as though it's right. But you'll notice, obviously here, I'm using it absolutely not to make my work easier. I am using it to make my work harder in the ways that make me better. Generally speaking, if you're a writer, agentic AI is a much better editor than it is a writer. So lean into that, even though it's not speeding you up. But think of that. Same thing for my work in science and mathematics and programming. I've never found a line of code I didn't hate writing, though it feels good at the end, having done it. But writing that out, planning it, and then using these tools essentially as a loyal opposition to aggressively challenge you, suggest alternatives, and then for you, again, to go deep and think about those. That's good. Last suggestion, a thing that didn't make it in the book because I only started recently doing it, we built a little script. I built a little script for my kids. I deployed it for Claude. It analyzes all of their AI interactions, regardless of the model that they're using, and it builds a little report at the end of every week. Here's where you simply did what the AI told you to do. Here's where it gave you good advice, but it looked like you ignored it. Here's where you took a good idea and you made it better. So both positive and negative. And if you're a nerd like me, a cognitive scientist, it's like an augmentative metacognition, helping you think through your own thinking, but at a big scope, a whole week of interactions. And it turns out it had a really big impact on how my kids engage, thinking about, am I just doing what it's telling me? Am I ignoring good advice because I didn't want to believe it? And where am I being really productive? It changed what they were doing, so I actually started using it. So that's three, kind of tangible examples, but plus that overarching, just as a theme. Most of us, most of the time, not even just with AI, are spending too much time shallow. Think about it, including with yourself. You should be your own loyal opposition. Be skeptical of your own thinking, because that's one of the other failure modes we find with AI is just asking it, why am I right? How is the person I don't like wrong? And it turns out that's a pretty big failure mode also.
So as we close this out, let's take this to the macro level. Those are the things we can do at the individual level, at the parenting level to kind of prepare yourself for the future. How can this type of learning, instruction, how can it be encouraged at the organizational level, at the community level, at the governmental level?
We've got sort of three levers, if you will, like a personal policy lever of it is possible to develop the qualities, the human capital that makes humans more successful. It's the reason my book has the subtitle, When Machines Have All the Answers, Build Better People. There are more AI productivity gains to be made from higher human capital than from better models right now. What an untapped possibility. But better models is also another possibility. But here's what's interesting and no one's really talking about, but it's in my experiment. We built a model called Socrates that never gives answers. So by design, it fails every benchmark. By design, it fails our test. It doesn't forecast because it won't give answers. It had, I'm trying to coin a term here, hybrid intelligence. If artificial intelligence is one thing and human natural intelligence is another, then hybrid intelligence is this emergent thing that we saw with our cyborgs in our experiment, where this sort of superhuman intelligence emerges from the interaction. Well, that highest rate of hybrid intelligence came from the Socrates model, the model which definitionally does the worst on standard benchmarks of AI. Why? Standard benchmarks measure how AI performs on their own. It doesn't tell you anything about whether this AI is making people better. And better could even be things like longevity rates or psychological well-being. And so there literally are no hybrid intelligence benchmarks out there. So my nonprofit is working on one. Another lever, not for the average person, but for organizations working in AI is, are we actually building an AI tool for pure automation? Or are we building one designed for human interaction for augmentation? Because no one can answer that because there are no benchmarks in that space. And I don't think anyone's really focusing on that problem. Then at the organization level, this is the messiest because there is a big lever there already. We have, over the last 200 years, built a management ideal in which your job as a business leader is to reduce uncertainty. If you've been reading behind the lines in my book and in our conversation here, I'm saying humanity's unique relative advantage here is our ability to deal with uncertainty and explore the unknown. If you manage that away, then you probably might as well just deploy a bunch of robots. Why treat human beings as crappy robots? Unfortunately, that's kind of what our education system has done for understandable reasons, but we don't need that anymore. Right now, humans remain better at AIs at dealing with uncertainty and unknown problems. Management needs to meet us there. Leverage humans to solve those complex problems. Don't build parallel work streams where AI automates something up to a point and then maybe a human takes on over that. Something is either automatable or it should be cyborged. And you should really think through a deep integrative workflow for the human machine to be working together. I am not really seeing many organizations where that's coming through, but what we are seeing is elite level, highly talented workers are doing this on their own right now. Management needs to meet them where they are. And then here's an important, it's a bit of a problem of the commons issue. How are your junior employees ever going to become those new elite workers? I don't think any company has thought deeply enough about this. People are starting to talk about it. How do you become an elite? How do you become a partner at a law firm if no one needs you to do case prep and contract review and all this, the 80-hour-a-week stuff that's sort of the horror stories of being a junior lawyer? If no one needs a resident to just do the scoping in medical, if no one needs junior employees to just write a whole bunch of boilerplate code anymore, how do you learn how to become a great scientist if I don't need graduate students anymore, just carrying out low-level analyses for me? And yeah, I kind of don't need them for that purpose. I started writing all of my own papers sole author because I don't need people to just carry out my orders. We need a very different way to think about entry-level work in elite world. And I think we need to start taking seriously from a global policy. What about everyone that isn't ready for elite work? Maybe never will be, at least the way the world was working right now. What happens in our current workforce if my prediction comes true and there's lots of new jobs and it's all for an elite labor force that we simply don't have enough population to fill, and everyone else is waiting for the jobs that aren't even worth an AI doing? There I begin to worry, I'll be honest, I'm more worried about that than I am about Skynet. It's not a jobs apocalypse. There'll be lots of terrible jobs too, but we have this big split, this huge demand spike in solving Opo's problem and doing elite labor, and probably a big demand spike in washing dishes and picking lettuce. jobs no one wishes for their kids. People do because it's the only thing left to them. We need to figure out how to pull more people across that divide.
Vivienne, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it. If people want to learn more about you, your book, where do you want to send them?
You can go to the land of curvy letters, socos.org, SOCOS. You'll find my free newsletter. If you're self-flagellating, you can actually pay for my paid newsletter, where you actually get the director's cut of my book, which is almost twice as long and it has way more dirty words. But really, you're just supporting the work at my philanthropy. But you can also find out about some of my companies working in Alzheimer's, working in AI for science. And I think just supporting the work that we're doing would be amazing.
Thanks for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode. As always, we really appreciate you listening. If you want to subscribe, you can find us on most major podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. Also, if you like us enough, I hope you leave us a favorable review. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this has been Technically Legal.